The blood dripped from her fingertips onto the rocky ground, and she did not even seem to notice as she reached once more into the wild rose thicket that grew along the mountain trail. Helena Ortega had been picking berries for what felt like hours, her basket only half full, her hands torn to ribbons by the thorns that guarded the precious fruit like nature's own barbed wire. She needed these berries. Without them, she would have nothing to trade at the general store in Manassas, Colorado, and without that trade, she would go another week without proper supplies. The year was 1878, and survival in these mountains demanded sacrifices, even if those sacrifices came in the form of her own blood. She had not heard his approach. Few people ever did. Patrick Owens moved through the wilderness like a shadow despite his considerable size, a skill learned from years of trapping and trading in these unforgiving peaks. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his shoulders broad enough to block out the afternoon sun, his arms thick with muscle earned from hauling steel traps and beaver pelts through miles of rough terrain. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves, and his beard was trimmed just enough to keep it manageable. He had been tracking an elk for the better part of the morning when he spotted the woman in the clearing, her small frame bent over the thorny bushes, completely absorbed in her task. It was the blood that made him stop, dark red droplets falling steadily from her hands as she continued to work, her fingers moving mechanically even as the thorns tore fresh cuts into her already wounded skin. Something twisted in his chest at the sight, a feeling he had not experienced in the 3 years since he had retreated from civilization to make his home in these mountains. "Stop," he said, his voice rough from disuse. Helena spun around so quickly that she dropped her basket, berries scattering across the ground. Her dark eyes went wide with fear as she took in the massive stranger standing at the edge of the clearing. She had heard stories about the mountain man who lived somewhere in these peaks, tales that painted him as either a dangerous recluse or a guardian spirit, depending on who was telling the story. Looking at him now, with his imposing size and wild appearance, she felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "I was just picking berries," she said quickly, holding up her bloody hands as if that would explain everything. "I did not mean to trespass on anyone's land." Patrick shook his head, taking a step closer. She flinched slightly but held her ground. "Your hands," he said simply, gesturing to them. "They are bleeding badly." Helena looked down as if seeing the damage for the first time. Her palms were crisscrossed with dozens of cuts, some shallow, others deeper, all of them still seeping blood. Now that her attention had been drawn to them, the pain came rushing in, sharp and insistent. She wrapped her apron around her hands, but the thin fabric quickly soaked through with red. "I needed the berries," she said, as if that explained everything. "For trading." He moved before she could react, closing the distance between them with surprising speed for a man of his size. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a striking gray, like storm clouds before rain. He reached for her hands and she jerked back instinctively. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, his voice gentler now, "but those cuts need tending. Let me see." Something in his tone made her trust him, or perhaps it was simply the pain that made her give in. She unwrapped her hands and held them out. Patrick examined them carefully, his large fingers surprisingly gentle as he turned her hands palm up. His jaw tightened as he took in the full extent of the damage. "You should have stopped a long time ago," he said, but there was no accusation in his voice, only concern. "I told you I needed the berries. Not worth this." He released her hands and turned back to the rose thicket. "Stay there." Helena watched in confusion as the mountain man approached the thorny bushes. He pulled a pair of thick leather gloves from his belt and put them on, then began methodically harvesting berries with practiced efficiency. His hands moved quickly, plucking the fruit and dropping it into her scattered basket, which he had righted with one boot. The thorns that had torn her skin to shreds seemed to pose no challenge to him at all. "You do not have to do that," she protested, but he ignored her. In less than 10 minutes, he had filled her basket to overflowing, then filled his own hat with even more berries for good measure. When he returned to her, he carried both the basket and his hat full of fruit, and there was not a single scratch on his gloved hands. "Sit," he said, nodding to a fallen log near the clearing's edge. "I should get back to town," Helena said, but even as she spoke, she felt lightheaded. She had lost more blood than she realized. "You will not make it to town like that. Sit." This time she obeyed, sinking onto the log with relief. Patrick set down the berries and knelt in front of her, removing his gloves. From a leather pouch at his belt, he produced a small tin and a length of clean cloth. He opened the tin, revealing a pale salve that smelled of pine and something medicinal. "This will sting," he warned, "but it will help with the healing." Helena nodded, bracing herself. When he took her right hand in both of his, she was struck by the size difference. His hands dwarfed hers, calloused and scarred from years of hard living, but his touch remained gentle as he began to clean the cuts with water from his canteen. She hissed in pain but did not pull away. "What is your name?" he asked, perhaps trying to distract her from the discomfort. "Helena." "Helena Ortega. I am Patrick Owens. I have heard of you. People in town say you have been living up here for years." 3 years, he confirmed, applying the salve to her wounds. True to his word, it stung sharply and she bit her lip to keep from crying out. "There, the worst is over." He wrapped her hand carefully in the clean cloth, binding it securely but not too tightly. Then he moved to her left hand and repeated the process. Helena watched him work, noting the concentration on his face, the way his brow furrowed as he tended to each cut with meticulous care. "Why do you live alone up here?" she asked. Patrick was silent for a moment, finishing the bandage before he answered. "The world down below got too loud, too many people wanting too many things. Up here it is just me and the mountains. It is simpler. Does it not get lonely?" He met her eyes and she saw something flicker in that gray gaze. "Sometimes, but loneliness is better than the alternative." "What alternative is that? Disappointment, betrayal, loss." He stood, packing away his medical supplies. "All things that come with letting people too close." Helena wanted to ask more, but something in his expression told her she had pushed far enough for now. Instead, she said, "Thank you for helping me. I do not know how I would have made it back to Manasseh like this." "How far is your walk?" "About 5 miles. Patrick looked at the sun, gauging the time. "Too far in your condition and it will be dark soon. My cabin is closer. You can rest there tonight and I will take you back to town in the morning." Helena's instinct was to refuse. She did not know this man, and propriety demanded that she not spend the night alone with a stranger, especially one who lived outside the bounds of civilized society. But her hands throbbed with pain, her head still felt light, and the prospect of walking 5 miles through increasingly treacherous terrain held no appeal. "I do not want to impose," she said finally. "It is not an imposition. It is practical." He picked up her basket and his hat full of berries. "Can you walk?" She stood, testing her balance. The world swayed slightly but held steady. "Yes." "Good, it is about a mile northeast. Tell me if you need to rest." They walked in silence at first, Patrick leading the way along a trail that Helena would never have found on her own. It wound through dense stands of pine and aspen, following the contours of the mountain with an efficiency that spoke of long familiarity. Despite his size, Patrick moved with surprising grace, occasionally holding back branches so they would not strike her or offering a hand when the path grew steep. "How long have you lived in Manasseh?" he asked as they walked. 2 years. I came from Santa Fe after my father died. He was a merchant there, but when he passed, his partner claimed all the assets. I had nothing, so I came here to work as a seamstress. Do you have family in Manasseh? No, just me. She paused, then added, "What about you? Did you leave family behind when you came to the mountains?" Patrick was quiet for so long that Helena thought he would not answer. Finally, he said, "I had a wife, Sarah. We were married young, full of plans and dreams. I was working as a guide, taking settlers over the passes. One trip took longer than expected. We got caught in a late spring blizzard, lost 2 wagons and 3 people. When I finally made it back to Denver, I found out Sarah had gotten sick, pneumonia. She died while I was gone." The raw pain in his voice made Helena's chest tighten. "I am so sorry. I quit guiding after that. Couldn't see the point in helping other people build new lives when mine had fallen apart. I came up here to trap, to be alone. It seemed easier that way." "And has it been?" "Easier." He glanced back at her, and she saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. "For a while. But lately, I have been wondering if maybe I have been hiding rather than healing." They reached the cabin as the last light began to fade from the sky. It was larger than Helena had expected, built solid with hand-hewn logs and a stone chimney that spoke of skilled craftsmanship. A covered porch ran along the front, and she could see neat stacks of firewood and what looked like curing pelts hanging under the eaves. "Home," Patrick said simply, pushing open the door. The interior was surprisingly comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking area built into it. A solid table and chairs occupied the center of the room, and Helena could see a bed frame in one corner, neatly made with what looked like thick furs. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies, tools, and books. Books surprised her somehow, though she could not say why. Patrick lit a lantern, then moved to build up the fire. "You can have the bed," he said. "I will sleep out here. I cannot take your bed. You can, and you will. You have lost blood and need proper rest." He set a kettle on to boil. "I have some dried venison and cornbread. It is not fancy, but it is filling." While he prepared the meal, Helena looked around the cabin more closely. The books on the shelves ranged from practical guides on trapping and wilderness survival to poetry and philosophy. She pulled down a worn copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass and saw notes in the margins written in a neat, precise hand. "You like to read," she said. "It helps pass the long winter nights." Patrick stirred something in a pot over the fire. "Do you read when I can get books?" "They are expensive, and most of what comes through Manasseh is dime novels." She replaced the book carefully. "My father taught me. He believed education was important even for daughters. He sounds like he was a wise man." "He was. I miss him every day." They ate together at the table, and Helena found herself relaxing in Patrick's presence. He was quiet but not unfriendly, and when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and genuine. She told him about her work as a seamstress, about the challenges of building a life alone in a rough mountain town, about her dreams of maybe one day opening her own dress shop if she could save enough money. Patrick listened intently, asking questions that showed he was truly interested. In turn, he told her about his trapping routes, about the animals he tracked and the changing seasons in the high country, about the profound silence of the mountains in winter when snow muffled every sound. "It sounds peaceful," Helena said. "It is. But peace and happiness are not always the same thing." He collected their empty plates. "You should rest. How are your hands feeling?" Helena looked down at the bandages. The throbbing had eased to a dull ache. "Better. Much better, actually. What was in that salve? Pine resin, beeswax, and some herbs I learned about from a Ute medicine man. It works well for cuts and scrapes. He gestured to the bed. There are extra blankets if you get cold. The fire should last most of the night. Helena hesitated, aware of the impropriety of the situation but too tired and sore to care much. Thank you, Patrick, for everything. You are welcome, Helena. She retreated to the bed, removing only her boots before slipping under the heavy furs. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, and the furs held a faint scent of pine and leather that she found oddly comforting. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Patrick settle into a chair by the fire with a book, the lamplight casting shadows across his strong features. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When Helena woke, early morning light was filtering through the cabin's small windows. She sat up slowly, testing her hands. The bandages were still clean and white, and the pain had diminished significantly overnight. She could hear sounds from outside and got up to investigate. Patrick was at the woodpile, splitting logs with powerful, precise swings of an axe. His shirt was off despite the morning chill, and Helena found herself staring at the play of muscles across his back and shoulders as he worked. Each swing of the axe sent another log splitting cleanly in two, and he moved with the kind of efficiency that came from long practice. He turned, perhaps sensing her presence, and she quickly averted her eyes, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. Patrick reached for his shirt and pulled it on. "How did you sleep?" he asked. "Very well, actually. Better than I have in months." She held up her hands. "These feel much better, too." "Good. I will change the bandages after breakfast." He carried an armload of wood inside, and Helena followed. "I hope you like oatmeal because that is what I have." "Oatmeal sounds wonderful." They fell into an easy rhythm, Patrick cooking while Helena set the table with plates and cups she found on the shelves. The domesticity of it struck her as both comfortable and strange. She had lived alone for 2 years, never having anyone to share morning routines with, and she had forgotten how pleasant such simple companionship could be. After breakfast, Patrick carefully removed the old bandages and examined her hands. The cuts were already beginning to close, the edges clean and free of infection. "Your salve works remarkably well," Helena said, watching him apply fresh medicine. "I have had plenty of practice treating my own injuries up here. You learn quickly when the nearest doctor is a day's ride away." He wrapped her hands in fresh cloth, his touch as gentle as it had been the day before. "These should heal cleanly. Keep them dry for a few more days if you can." "I will try, though it will make sewing difficult." "Can you take a few days off from work?" Helena shook her head. "I have orders to fill. Mrs. Henderson needs a new dress for her daughter's wedding next month, and the payment is already promised to my landlord for next month's rent." Patrick frowned but did not argue. "Then be careful with them. Come back if you see any signs of infection." "Come back." "To the cabin. I can give you more salve and change the bandages properly." He finished securing the cloth and stood. "I will take you back to Manasseh now if you are ready." They gathered her basket of berries and set out. The morning was clear and cool, with mist still clinging to the valleys below. Patrick led her along what seemed to be a different route, one that was easier and more direct than the path she had been on when he found her. "I did not know this trail existed," Helena said. "Most people do not. It is an old game trail that I have maintained over the years. It cuts several miles off the journey to town." As they walked, Helena found herself stealing glances at her companion. In the daylight, she could better appreciate the strength in his frame, the confidence in his movements, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings with practiced awareness. She felt safe with him in a way she had not felt safe in a very long time. Patrick, she said suddenly, why did you help me yesterday? You could have just walked away. He was quiet for a moment before answering. I saw someone in pain who needed help. I had the knowledge and supplies to provide that help. It seemed like a simple decision. But you live up here specifically to avoid people. I do. He paused, then added more quietly, or at least I did. I am beginning to think that maybe complete isolation was not the answer I thought it was. They reached the outskirts of Manasseh around mid-morning. The town was built in a valley where the mountains gave way to flatter land, a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street. Helena could see the general store, the church with its white steeple, the saloon, and various homes and businesses that made up the community. I live above the seamstress shop, Helena said, pointing to a two-story building near the center of town. The one with the blue trim. Patrick walked her all the way to her door despite the curious stares from the townspeople they passed. Helena knew that by evening, the entire town would be buzzing with speculation about her and the mysterious mountain man. Thank you again, she said as they stopped at her door. I do not know how I can repay you. No repayment needed. Patrick handed her the basket of berries. Just take care of those hands. Will I see you again? He met her eyes, and she saw something uncertain flicker across his face. I come to town every few weeks for supplies. Perhaps our paths will cross. I hope they do. Helena surprised herself with the boldness of the statement, but it was true. The thought of not seeing Patrick again left her with an unexpected sense of loss. Patrick nodded once, then turned and walked back toward the mountains, his long strides carrying him quickly away. Helena watched until he disappeared from sight, then carried her berries inside, her mind full of thoughts about the strange and gentle man who had appeared in her life like a character from a story. The next few weeks passed slowly. Helena threw herself into her work, completing Mrs. Henderson's dress, and taking on several other projects that kept her hands busy even as they finished healing. The cuts closed cleanly just as Patrick had predicted, leaving only faint pink lines that would eventually fade to nothing. But no matter how busy she kept herself, Helena could not stop thinking about Patrick. She found herself remembering the gentleness of his touch as he bandaged her hands, the deep timbre of his voice, the unexpected thoughtfulness of his conversation. She caught herself looking toward the mountains whenever she stepped outside, wondering if he was thinking of her too. The other women in town had plenty to say about her encounter with the mountain man. Mrs. Henderson was scandalized that Helena had spent the night in his cabin, even after Helena explained the circumstances. Several of the other ladies made pointed comments about propriety and reputation, though a few of the younger women seemed enviously curious rather than judgmental. I heard he is wild as the animals he traps, one woman said at the general store while Helena was trading her berries. I heard he killed a man in Denver and had to flee to the mountains, another added. Helena bit her tongue, resisting the urge to defend Patrick to people who had never even met him. Instead, she completed her business and returned to her shop, trying to focus on the wedding dress taking shape under her hands. It was nearly a month after their first meeting when Helena saw Patrick again. She was at the general store, purchasing thread and fabric, when she heard his deep voice behind her. "Afternoon, Tom. I need supplies." Helena turned so quickly that she knocked over a spool of thread. Patrick stood in the doorway, and for a moment their eyes met. Something warm and electric passed between them, and Helena felt her heart begin to race. "Hello, Helena," Patrick said, moving closer. "How are your hands?" "Healed completely." She held them up to show him. "Your salve worked perfectly. Good. I am glad to hear it." They stood there, suddenly awkward, while Tom the shopkeeper watched with undisguised interest. Helena knew this encounter would be the subject of gossip by evening, but she found she did not care. "Can I buy you coffee?" Patrick asked suddenly. "I know it is not proper, but I would like to talk to you if you have time." "I would like that," Helena said, surprising herself again with her boldness. They walked to the small restaurant at the end of the main street, drawing stares and whispers as they went. Inside, they took a table in the corner and Patrick ordered coffee for them both. "The town seems very interested in us," Patrick observed wryly. "Small towns thrive on gossip. We have given them something to talk about." "Does that bother you?" Helena considered the question. "A month ago, it would have. I have worked hard to build a respectable reputation here, but now I find that I care less about what people think than I do about having this conversation with you." Patrick's expression softened. "I have been thinking about you, a lot. I told myself it was foolish, that I had chosen a solitary life for good reasons, but I could not get you out of my head." "I have been thinking about you too," Helena admitted. "I kept hoping I would see you in town. I came down 3 times in the past month just hoping to catch a glimpse of you. I felt like a schoolboy with his first crush." Helena laughed, and Patrick smiled at the sound. Their coffee arrived and they talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Patrick told her more about his life in the mountains, about the beauty of watching elk migrations, and the challenge of surviving winter storms. Helena shared stories about her customers, about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful from simple cloth and thread, about her dreams for the future. "I would like to court you properly," Patrick said finally, his gray eyes serious. "I know my life is not conventional, and I know it might damage your reputation to be seen with me, but I cannot walk away without at least asking." Helena's heart soared. "I would like that very much. Even knowing that I live in the mountains, that I am not a proper town gentleman. Especially because of those things." Helena reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "I spent 2 years trying to fit myself into the mold of what this town expected of me. But the truth is, I have never felt like I truly belonged here. When I am with you, when you talk about the mountains and the life you have built there, I feel something I have not felt since my father died. I feel possibility." Patrick turned his hand over so their palms met, his fingers curling gently around hers. "Then we will figure this out together." Over the following months, Patrick became a regular visitor to Manasseh. He would come down from his cabin every week, bringing fresh meat and pelts to trade, and he would always stop at Helena's shop. Sometimes they would sit together in her small living quarters above the shop, talking for hours while she sewed. Other times they would walk together through the valley, Patrick pointing out animal tracks and plant life, sharing his vast knowledge of the wilderness. The town's opinion remained divided. Some people thought Helena was throwing away her respectability for a rough mountain man. Others found the romance of it appealing, a real-life adventure unfolding in their midst. Helena found that as time went on, she cared less and less about anyone's opinion except Patrick's. One crisp October afternoon, Patrick arrived with a surprise. "I want to show you something," he said. "Can you spare a day away from your work?" "What is it?" "A secret. You will have to trust me." Helena packed a bag and locked up her shop, leaving a note that she would be gone until the next day. Patrick had brought his horse, a sturdy mountain-bred mare named Storm, and he lifted Helena into the saddle before swinging up behind her. She settled back against his broad chest, feeling the strength of his arms as he guided the horse up into the mountains. They rode for several hours, climbing higher than Helena had ever been. The aspens had turned gold, painting the mountainsides in brilliant color. Eagles soared overhead, and once they spotted a small herd of elk grazing in a distant meadow. Finally, They reached a high mountain lake that sat like a sapphire nestled in granite peaks. The water was so clear that Helena could see trout swimming near the shore. The surrounding silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of wind through the pines. "This is my favorite place in all the mountains," Patrick said, helping Helena down from the horse. "I have never brought anyone here before." "It is breathtaking," Helena breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. They spent the afternoon beside the lake. Patrick caught fish for their dinner, cooking them over an open fire while Helena explored the shoreline. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they sat together on a fallen log, watching the light change on the water. "I love you," Patrick said quietly. "I did not think I would ever say those words again, but I love you, Helena. You brought light back into my life when I thought I would spend the rest of my days in darkness." Helena turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I love you too. I think I have loved you since that first day when you stopped me from destroying my hands for a basket of berries." Patrick cupped her face in his large, calloused hands and kissed her gently. Helena leaned into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, and the kiss deepened. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "Marry me," Patrick said. "I know my life is unconventional. I know I cannot give you a fine house in town or the kind of life most women want, but I can give you my whole heart, and I can promise to love you and protect you for as long as I live." "Yes," Helena said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you. I do not want a conventional life. I want the mountains and the wilderness and the freedom to be truly myself. I want to wake up every morning beside you and fall asleep every night in your arms." Yes. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Manasseh. It was a simple ceremony attended by the few friends Helena had made in town, and a handful of trappers who knew Patrick from his years in the mountains. The town was scandalized when Helena announced she would be selling her seamstress business and moving to Patrick's cabin, but she had never been more certain of anything in her life. The first winter in the mountains tested Helena in ways she had never imagined. Snow fell in quantities she had only read about, piling so high that Patrick had to dig paths from the cabin to the woodshed and the lean to where Storm sheltered. The cold was intense, seeping through every crack despite Patrick's excellent craftsmanship. Some days they barely left the cabin at all, spending their time by the fire, reading, talking, and learning the intimate details of each other's hearts and souls. But Helena thrived. Patrick taught her to snowshoe, to read animal signs, to recognize the subtle changes in the weather. She learned to tan hides and to cook over the open fire. Her hands, once soft and accustomed only to needle and thread, grew stronger from chopping wood and hauling water. She had never worked so hard in her life, and she had never been happier. Spring came late to the high country that year, but when it finally arrived, it transformed the mountains into paradise. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows in every color imaginable. Bears emerged from their winter dens with new cubs. The sound of rushing water was everywhere as snowmelt filled the streams and waterfalls. Patrick took Helena to places even more remote and beautiful than the lake where he had proposed, sharing with her the secret wilderness that had become his home. One morning in early summer, Helena woke feeling ill. She made it outside just in time to be sick behind the cabin. Patrick found her there, pale and shaking, and immediately went into protector mode, carrying her back inside and insisting she rest. "I am fine," Helena protested. "I just ate something that did not agree with me." But when the morning sickness continued for a week, they both realized what it meant. Helena was pregnant. Patrick's reaction was a mixture of joy and terror. He became even more protective than before, insisting that Helena not overexert herself, that she rest more, that she stay close to the cabin. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Helena finally said in exasperation after Patrick tried to stop her from carrying water. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. But you are my wife," Patrick said, pulling her into his arms. "You are my whole world. I cannot lose you." Helena softened, understanding the fear that drove his overprotectiveness. "You will not lose me. I am strong, and we will face this together, just like we face everything else." As her pregnancy progressed, Patrick became determined to make sure Helena had access to medical care when the time came. He built a small addition onto the cabin to serve as a nursery, working with focused intensity to complete it before winter came again. He also made arrangements with a midwife in Manasseh, ensuring that she would be available when Helena's time came, even if it meant staying in town for a week or two before and after the birth. But nature had other plans. In early December, a massive blizzard swept through the mountains, arriving with little warning. Patrick had been checking his trap line, something he insisted on doing himself even as the weather turned threatening. He had been gone only a few hours, but in that time, the storm intensified with frightening speed. Helena felt the first contraction hit, just as she began to worry seriously about Patrick. She gripped the edge of the table, breathing through the pain, telling herself it was just practice contractions, that the baby was not due for another 2 weeks. But the next contraction came 20 minutes later, and the one after that even sooner. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, and snow fell so thickly that Helena could not see past the porch. She built up the fire, boiled water because that was what she thought you were supposed to do, and laid out clean linens and blankets. The contractions grew closer together and more intense. Helena tried not to panic, tried to remember everything she had read about childbirth, but fear threatened to overwhelm her. Where was Patrick? Had he found shelter from the storm? Was he hurt or lost? The thought of something happening to him, of raising their child alone, brought tears to her eyes even as another contraction seized her. Patrick was indeed in trouble. The storm had caught him miles from the cabin, and the familiar landmarks he used for navigation had disappeared in the whiteout conditions. Storm was nervous, dancing sideways and tossing her head. Patrick forced himself to stay calm, to trust his instincts and his knowledge of the land. He had to get home. Helena was alone, and even though the baby was not due yet, he could not shake the feeling that she needed him. He gave Storm her head, trusting the horse's instincts over his own dimming senses. The mare picked her way carefully through the blizzard, sometimes stopping to test the ground ahead, sometimes changing direction in ways that made no sense to Patrick, but which he chose to trust. Hours passed, hours in which Patrick lost all feeling in his face and hands despite his heavy clothing, hours in which he began to fear that neither he nor Storm would make it home alive. Then, through the shrieking wind, he saw a faint glow. The cabin. Patrick urged Storm forward, and the mare broke into a struggling trot through the deep snow. They reached the lean-to, and Patrick practically fell from the saddle. He got Storm inside and threw a blanket over her, promising to return, then fought his way through the drifts to the cabin door. Inside, he found Helena on the bed, her face contorted in pain. She looked up as he entered, snow-covered and half-frozen, and the relief in her eyes was overwhelming. "The baby is coming," she gasped. "Patrick, the baby is coming now." Patrick shed his outer clothing and went immediately to her side. His hands were numb, and he plunged them into the warm water Helena had prepared, feeling returning to his fingers in painful prickles. He had helped deliver foals and calves, had even assisted once when a trapper's wife went into labor early, but this was different. This was Helena. This was his child. "I am here," he said, gripping her hand. "I am here, and we will get through this together." The hours that followed tested them both. The labor was long and difficult, and Patrick felt helpless in the face of Helena's pain. All his strength, all his survival skills, meant nothing here. All he could do was hold her hand, wipe her face with cool cloths, and tell her over and over that she was strong, that she could do this, that he loved her. Finally, as dawn began to break and the storm outside showed signs of weakening, their son entered the world with an indignant cry. Patrick caught the baby in trembling hands, overwhelmed by the tiny, perfect life they had created. He cleaned the infant carefully and wrapped him in soft blankets, then placed him in Helena's arms. "A boy," Helena whispered, tears streaming down her exhausted face. "We have a son." "He is perfect," Patrick said, his own eyes wet. "You are perfect. You did it." They named him Peter, after Patrick's father, and for the first few weeks of his life, Patrick barely let Helena out of his sight. He did everything except nurse the baby, changing Peter's cloths, walking him when he fussed, watching him sleep with an expression of wonder on his rugged face. "You are going to spoil him," Helena said one afternoon, watching Patrick rock their son by the fire. "Probably," Patrick agreed without apology. "But after almost losing you both in that storm, I do not care. I want to savor every moment." As winter slowly gave way to spring, they settled into their new life as a family. Peter thrived in the mountain cabin, growing strong and healthy. Helena marveled at how naturally Patrick took to fatherhood, his big hands so gentle with their small son, his deep voice singing lullabies that he must have learned in his own childhood. One warm day in May, as they sat together on the cabin porch watching Peter play with wooden toys Patrick had carved, Helena said, "I never knew life could be this good. Sometimes I wake up and have to remind myself that this is real, that I actually get to live this life with you." Patrick pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I was dead inside when I met you. I had given up on everything except survival. You brought me back to life, Helena. You and Peter are my whole world." Years passed in the mountains, measured by seasons rather than calendars. Peter grew into a sturdy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's quick mind. Patrick taught him to track and hunt, to respect the wilderness and understand its dangers. Helena taught him to read and write, using the books from Patrick's shelves and creating lessons from the world around them. When Peter was 4, Helena became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and they made the journey down to Manasseh in plenty of time. Their daughter was born in the midwife's care with no complications. They named her Rose, a reminder of the thorny bushes where their love story had begun. 2 years later, a third child joined the family, another boy they named James. The cabin rang with laughter and the sounds of children playing. Patrick built additions to accommodate their growing family, and Helena created a home filled with love and warmth. The town of Manasseh never quite knew what to make of the Owens family. They appeared a few times a year, the huge bearded mountain man with his small, dark-haired wife, and their gaggle of children, all of them healthy and happy and clearly devoted to each other. Some people still disapproved of the unconventional life Helena had chosen, but most came to accept and even admire the family that thrived in the high country. As the children grew older, Patrick and Helena sometimes talked about the future. Peter showed signs of wanting to explore the wider world, and they encouraged his curiosity even as it pained them to think of him leaving. Rose was fearless, climbing trees and tracking animals with her father, declaring that she would be a mountain woman like her mother. James was quietest of the three, happiest with books and drawing, capturing the beauty of their mountain home in surprisingly skilled sketches. "They will all find their own paths," Helena said one evening as she and Patrick sat together after putting the children to bed. "Just like we found ours." "Do you ever regret it?" Patrick asked. "Giving up your business, your life in town, everything you worked to build?" Helena looked at him in surprise. "Never. Not for one single moment. This life with you, with our children in these mountains, this is more than I ever dreamed of having." "You saved me, Patrick. Not just my hands that day, but all of me." "I think we saved each other," Patrick said, pulling her into his arms. "You gave me a reason to live again. You turned my shelter into a home." As the years continued to pass, the Owens family became something of a legend in the Manasseh area. Stories were told about the mountain man who had gentled for love, about the town woman who had chosen wilderness over civilization, about the children who could track a deer through the forest and recite poetry by firelight. Peter did eventually leave the mountains, making his way to Denver to study medicine. He wrote often, telling his parents about the expanding city and his studies, but he also wrote about missing the clean air and silence of the high country. Rose, true to her childhood declaration, stayed in the mountains, eventually marrying a young trapper who Patrick approved of after rigorous testing. James surprised everyone by becoming a naturalist, using his artistic skills to document the plants and animals of the region in a way that garnered attention from universities back east. Through it all, Patrick and Helena remained devoted to each other. Their love deepened with time, weathering challenges and celebrating triumphs, always stronger together than apart. They grew old in their mountain cabin, their hair turning gray, their bodies marked by years of hard work, but their love remained as fresh and vital as it had been the day Patrick first saw Helena bleeding from the thorns. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Patrick took Helena back to the high mountain lake where he had proposed. They were both in their 50s now, their children grown and starting families of their own, but when Patrick looked at Helena in the golden light of sunset, he saw the same woman he had fallen in love with decades ago. "I would do it all again," he said, taking her hand. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy, I would choose you over and over." Helena leaned against his shoulder, watching the light dance on the water. "Do you remember the day we met, when you found me destroying my hands for berries? I remember thinking you were the most stubborn woman I had ever seen, picking berries while your hands bled." Patrick smiled. "I also remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. You stopped me from hurting myself further. You picked the rest of the berries yourself and bandaged my hands so gently. I think I started falling in love with you right then." "I was terrified," Patrick admitted. "I had spent 3 years building walls around my heart, and you tore them down in a matter of hours. I fought it at first, tried to convince myself that I was better off alone. Thank goodness you lost that fight. Thank goodness indeed." Patrick turned to face her fully, cupping her weathered face in his large, scarred hands. "You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. You are still the strongest, most stubborn, most wonderful woman in the world. I love you, Helena. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Patrick, always." They kissed as the sun set over the mountain lake. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life of love and purpose in the wilderness, who had proven that sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the most unexpected places. Years later, when their grandchildren would ask about how they met, Helena would tell them about the thorns and the blood and the gentle giant who appeared like something out of a fairy tale. Patrick would add details about her stubbornness and courage, about how she transformed his lonely cabin into a home filled with love. And they would both agree that sometimes the best stories begin with pain, with struggle, with obstacles that seem insurmountable. Because overcoming those obstacles together creates a bond that nothing can break, a love that weathers every storm, a partnership that grows stronger with every passing year. The Owens family continued to thrive in the Colorado mountains, generation after generation, each one adding their own chapters to the family story. But it all began with a woman who needed berries to survive, and a man who saw her pain and chose to help. It began with thorns and blood and bandages applied with unexpected gentleness. It began with two lonely souls finding each other in the vast wilderness and discovering that together they were home. As Patrick and Helena entered their final years, they remained inseparable. They would sit together on the porch of their cabin, now expanded and improved over decades, watching the sun set over the peaks they loved. They would hold hands like young lovers, their fingers intertwined, each touch a reaffirmation of vows spoken long ago. When Patrick passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, Helena held his hand one last time, whispering her love and gratitude for the beautiful life they had built together. The family gathered in the mountains to say goodbye, and they buried him on a hillside overlooking that secret lake where he had proposed, where the aspens turned gold in autumn, and the view stretched forever. Helena lived another 5 years, spending her final days surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, all of them products of the love she and Patrick had shared. She told stories right up until the end, keeping alive the memory of the gentle mountain man who had changed her life with a simple act of kindness. When Helena passed, the family buried her beside Patrick, reuniting them in death as they had been in life. On their shared headstone, their son James carved a simple inscription. They found each other in the wilderness and built a love that lasted forever. The cabin still stands in those Colorado mountains, maintained by descendants of Peter, Rose, and James. It has become a gathering place for the family, a reminder of where they came from and the love that started it all. And sometimes, when the wind blows through the pines just right, you can almost hear the echo of laughter, of children playing, of two people who loved each other absolutely finding joy in the simple act of being together. The story of Patrick and Helena Owens became part of the local folklore, told and retold with various embellishments and changes. But the truth was simpler and more beautiful than any legend. Two people, both wounded by life in different ways, found healing in each other. A chance encounter on a mountain trail led to a lifetime of love, devotion, and family. And it all began with thorns that drew blood, with berries that needed picking, with a mountain man who saw a woman in need and made the choice to help rather than walk away. That single choice, that moment of compassion and connection, changed two lives forever and created ripples that spread through generations. In the end, their love story was not about grand gestures or dramatic declarations, though those certainly had their place. It was about the everyday choice to love, to partner, to face life's challenges together. It was about building something beautiful in a harsh environment, about creating warmth and light in the wilderness. It was about seeing another person truly, completely, and choosing to bind your life to theirs. The mountains where Patrick and Helena built their life continue to stand, eternal and unchanging in their essential nature, yet always shifting with the seasons. The same thorny rose bushes still grow along the trails, still bear fruit in summer, still draw blood from the unwary. But they also serve as a reminder that sometimes pain and beauty are intertwined, that the most valuable things in life often require sacrifice, and that the sweetest moments are those we share with the ones we love. And so the legacy of Patrick and Helena Owens lives on, not just in their descendants but in the values they embodied. Hard work, devotion, the courage to choose love over fear, the strength to build a life on your own terms rather than accepting what others expect of you. The wisdom to recognize that true wealth is measured not in money or possessions, but in the depth of your relationships and the richness of your experiences. Their story reminds us that love can bloom in the most unlikely places, that second chances exist even after devastating loss, that one act of kindness can change the entire trajectory of a life. It reminds us that the strongest partnerships are built not in the easy times but in the challenges, not in the sunshine but in the storms. As the sun sets over the Colorado mountains one more time, casting long shadows across valleys and peaks, the spirit of their love lingers. In every gentle touch between partners, in every act of service without expectation of reward, in every choice to see another person's pain and offer comfort, Patrick and Helena's legacy continues. Their story began with blood on thorns and ended with two lives completely intertwined, with a family that spans generations, with a love that truly did last forever. And that, perhaps, is the greatest testament to the power of compassion, the importance of that first choice to help rather than walk away, and the incredible beauty that can grow when two people commit to building a life together. The mountains stand eternal, and somewhere in their peaks and valleys, the echo of a great love story continues to resonate, inspiring those who hear it to look for their own chance encounters, their own moments of connection, their own opportunities to choose love over isolation, partnership over solitude, hope over despair. And if you listen carefully to the wind in the aspens, you might just hear the whisper of Patrick's deep voice speaking words of devotion, or Helena's laugh ringing out in joy, or the sound of children playing in the wilderness that became their home. All of it a testament to what two people can build when they face life hand in hand, heart to heart, forever bound by a love that began with thorns and blood and bandages, wrapped with unexpected gentleness.